Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be going through my 10 essential heavy metal albums, right? So on this I'm going to look into my collection and pull out my essential albums that I own. I have 10 and, I've got some metal albums there, or so I thought. I'm going to pull those out. That's the idea. That's what I'm doing for the next couple of months. I've got my collection behind me, and I am going into that and talking about my experience of buying records, collecting them. It's much more subjective than what I've done in the past. So last night I started to pencil out the albums that would be my essential heavy metal albums. Of the albums I own, I thought, well, I would say the greatest heavy metal album is probably Master of Puppets. So I wrote Master of Puppets down. I thought Super Unknown, I love that, Soundgarden. I wrote that down, and I wrote a whole bunch of and they were albums that I owned. I come here this morning and I go to get Master of Puppets. It's not there. I've searched everywhere. I have lost my Master of Puppets. Now, I've lost my Super Unknown. I've lost my Nirvana Nevermind. I've lost a whole bunch of albums. And I sat there and I thought, where did you lose these? I could have lost that Master of Puppets 10 years ago. And the reason is because I don't listen to it. And I sat there and I thought to myself, you're here because of the new wave of British heavy metal. That's what got you into music. I've just seen a friend of mine, my friend Kevin, we've just had a conversation about this. He asked me about the Black Sabbath gig. He said, did you watch it? I said, of course I watched it. He goes, do you like Black Sabbath? I said, I love them, one of my favourite bands. And he says, and he doesn't get it. He's not a Sabbath fan. He knew the guys when he was coming up in the 60s. He knew those guys. He used to go watch Sabbath play when they were first formed. And I was trying to explain to it what Sabbath was like for my generation and how that opened the door to all the music. And so I have a very strong allegiance, is the best way to describe it, to heavy metal. The new wave of British heavy metal is why I'm here. And what I wanted to do was I thought, let's put a stake in the ground. Number of the Beast, Iron Maiden, 1982. I'm only going to pick heavy metal albums after that date. So I'm not going to be picking Sabbath albums. I'm not going to be looking at Deep Purple or Judas Priest. None of that. Proper metal albums that a young kid will go, well, that's a metal album. So I write this list. As I say, get here. They're not here. I've lost them. And I can't remember losing them. And why have I lost them? Because I don't listen to them. These albums that I was about to say was essential, I thought I owned, but I've lost them. I'm trying to explain what this means to me. It means that I'm not listening to them. It means that I didn't care about them. When I lost them, I didn't notice they were lost. When other albums I've lost them, I go, oh my God, I've lost Master of Puppets. I better go and buy that again, and I'll buy it and I'll have it. But I haven't done that, you see. So I then go, well, pick 10 albums in your collection which are heavy metal, which fulfill the criteria. Heavy albums, heavy metal, not heavy rock albums, post 1982. And I've got them here. But I don't actually think they are the essential album. So this video is a little bit of a cheat. But if we're going to go back to my collection and pull out what's in there, we have to deal with what we learn, or what I learn, and what I can communicate to you. So the subtext of this video is going to be, do I really like heavy metal anymore? And I don't know whether I do. I started watching the Sabbath thing at 1 o'clock. We were live streaming, chatting away. And I went, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we went through to 1 o'clock at night. So that was 10 hours. And I'm sat there and I'm enjoying it. I'm watching Slayer and Anthrax and all that. So, for example, Anthrax, I would say, is my favourite of the thrash metal bands. I own 3 albums by Anthrax in my collection. I've got Among the Living, The Persistence of Time, and the one that came in between that with the spirals on, which have just escaped me, right? So I come in, I go to the A section, none of them are there. I've lost them all. And I haven't noticed it. I have lost them, not replaced them. The only Anthrax I had in my collection was the single of Bring the Noise, which they did with Public Enemy. That's the only thing I've got now. And they're supposedly my favourite thrash metal band. And I thought, you know, because I don't listen to them. do I really like metal, or is it just me, doffing my cap to a younger me? And you might say, well, Andy, what do you listen to? What do you actually listen to? When I get in the car, at the moment, I've got a box set of Aretha Franklin and an Eric Dolphy album. That's what I'm listening to at the moment. Do I even like heavy metal anymore? What do I think about it? Anyway, let's go through the 10 albums I have managed to pull out of my collection. And this is really slim pickings. There's not much metal in there. And some of these are really pushing the boat out, I think. This is not great whatsoever. So let's just start off with Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden. Let's put a stake in the ground. There it is. That's where we're starting from. We're moving forward from that. I was then going to put up Master of Puppets by Metallica. I absolutely love this album. This is a replacement. I had this on vinyl and I lost it, and then I bought this on CD when they brought it back out in 1998. And this has got some extra stuff on here. It's like I've got an enhanced CD. But the thing that makes this album so great is the songwriting. I'm a Paul Di'Anno era Iron Maiden guy. That's what I love, right? I wanted to pull the Iron Maiden. I'm doing it now. I used to have the debut Iron Maiden on vinyl. I never had Killers, but I had Maiden Japan. Those are the two vinyl copies I had, and then I bought Number of the Beast, Peace of Mind, which I'm sure I must have somewhere, and that was it. I was gone then, right? I love the Paul Di'Anno more, but this is the album. And with Bruce Dickinson coming in at this point, it's like they've got all this stuff is latent, and suddenly this sort of almost like progressive rock aesthetic comes in. Invaders, Children of the Damned, The Prisoner, Number of the Beast, Gangland, Run to the Hills. They're all themed. They're all exploring history and horror and all this type of stuff. So that's where we start, right? Now, again, Peace of Mind I bought. I was a big fan of Clive Burr. Nico McBrain's amazing. But once he came in, I sort of lost interest, because by then I'd listened to prog and I'd gone. And I never, ever listened to an Iron Maiden album. And I think it's a fluke that I just happened to have this. This could have easily been lost. A lot of the new wave of British heavy metal albums I owned, when I got into prog and fusion, I was old enough then to go out and buy records myself. So I would go to second-hand record shops, take my Samson album down and swap it for Weather Reports, So I lost in that. I knew those. And I think I had like all the Judas Priest albums up to Point of Entry. I didn't have Rock Roller, but all those, I had those all the way through. I've got none of them. Even Sin After Sin, I haven't got. Right, so what have we got here? Where do we start next? Right, so next one I'm going to show is, this is like on vinyl. So I bought this when it came out, and this was probably one of the last vinyl albums I ever bought, because by this time I'd moved over to CD. I don't know whether you'd describe this as a heavy metal album, but I absolutely loved it, and that's Faith No More. And this album is called The Real Thing. There is on the back. It's got the big hit Epic on. Faith No More, they don't get the credit they should, because this band were formed in 1984, 85. They went all the way through. They were before the Red Hot Chili Peppers, really, in terms of what they were doing, before the whole grunge thing. And they pulled up to that together. I was a little bit suspicious of the whole grunge thing, because I didn't like the fact that they had a style, grunge. And when I look back, there wasn't really a grunge style. Soundgarden were nothing like Pearl Jam, really. But the limitations of that meant that those bands weren't as interesting as a band like Faith No More, who felt they could do all sorts of things, that it was more expansive. But I think Faith No More are one of the first bands that take metal and started dragging it back into being an artistic form, away from all the like big hair LA metal bands which were so successful in the 1980s, which I wasn't really a fan of that much. And then the thrash metal bands, they sort of took that aesthetic, and the thrash metal bands are great. But I've got to be honest, all those albums I've lost. I'm not going to listen to those. You know, it's like this one I've kept. That's the only vinyl one on the list is Faith No More. Right, so no Soundgarden. But what I have kept hold of, which is interesting to me in terms of the grunge era, I still own an Alice in Chains album, which is great. You know, there's no Soundgarden, there's no Nirvana, there's no Pearl Jam. The only one I've got is Alice in Chains. Now, I think, again, Alice in Chains, who were one of the pioneering grunge bands, don't quite get the credit, even though they sold millions and millions of albums, the same as Soundgarden and Nirvana, and actually were one of the first to really sell millions. Again, they seem to be more expansive, and they seem to marry the grunge aesthetic, which was like a punk and Black Sabbath aesthetic. They marry that with a bit of the old hair metal as well, which I like, I think. Great players, great harmony vocals. I haven't got one of their albums. I at some point, so this I've still got. Back in the day, Soundgarden was my band, but I think I only ever owned 3 albums by them. They've all gone. I think I've got a vinyl one stored. I think there's a couple. My wife's a huge Soundgarden fan, so I've still got them in the house, but I don't own them. So of the grunge era bands, I've got that. Another CD that I still own is this one, Ministry, which is called, it's called that in reality, which I think that stands for Psalm 69. This is my 9 Inch Nails. I've got a 9 Inch Nails, although I haven't been able to spot that. I'm sure I've got Downward Spiral in there, and I don't know whether that's there. I don't even know whether you'd call that as a metal album. This is definitely a metal album, but it's made by a duo and it's using samplers and electronics. And this is an album, it's absolutely, I think of all of these, I would probably still listen to this one. This seems to go beyond metal. There's an artistry to this album. And it's dark and it's heavy. From that era, what else have I got? There's quite a few here from that era now. I've got nothing post around about 1995. We've got 6 albums to go on my 10 essential. So I pulled out Pantera, Vulgar Display of Power. I still listen to this album. This for me is possibly the greatest metal album because I listen to this one all the time. Why do I like them above all the others? Well, they're heavy and it sounds like they're really playing. It doesn't sound like it's computerized, but they have a rolling swing which seems to have been lost in the mists of modern metal. None of the bands have any dirt and none of them know how to swing. Pantera know how to swing. What an incredible album that is. And this sort of Pantera that we have now with Zakk Wylde and Charlie Benante, I think they were great. I thought they were wonderful on the Sabbath gig, absolutely amazing. What else have we got? The debut Rage Against the Machine album, without doubt the greatest rap metal album of all time. The riffs are incredible, the production's incredible, lots of anger, lots of shouting, but more than that, lots of, fist-thumping riffs. Do modern metal bands know how to play a riff? I just don't know. I don't know whether they have enough of the blues in them, if they have enough of the funk in them, enough of the hip-hop, enough of the James Brown, enough of the Ike Turner in them to be able to turn out a proper dirty riff. This band knew how to riff to the cows come home. Still listen to that one. I had that in the car the other day. Right, it gets a bit weirder now, and I've had to go to this, and this is where the sort of progressive rock end of me starts to emerge. One of the greatest metal bands I've ever seen live, and I saw them 5 times live, always blew me away, with Living Colour. Here's Time's Up. They do more than just metal on here, but there's tons of metal on here. Time's Up, the opening track, which with that sort of blurring, thrash metal, virtuoso, almost like free jazz playing from Vernon Reid. You've got the old Muskellins, Will Calhoun rhythm section, which I absolutely loved. Muskellins is a bit more funkier than Doug Wingbush, a little bit more of a normal bass player in a way. Doug Wingbush is incredible, but he's almost occupying the same place as Vernon Reid. And of course, Corey Glover's vocals are absolutely incredible. I would still listen to that, but it's so varied, and there's so much more on here. I don't know. I think I'm really I'm sort of moving away from metal already with that one. 3 to go. This album, Mr. Bungle's debut album, one of my favourite albums of all time. All 3 Bungle albums are incredible, right? But this is the one that normal metalers listen to. Once they brought out Disco Volante, they were lost to normal metalers. But I had a friend, and her little brother was into metal. His favourite band at the time was Therapy. I remember that. And I remember going around to see her, and he went, Andy, have you heard Mr. Bungle? And I said, no. And he went, Alice, you'd like it. And I went and got this album, saw the John Zorn credit on the bottom, put it on. This is mind blowing, but this is progressive rock, isn't it? This is progressive metal, like not Dream Theater progressive metal, right? Not even Voivod that are incredible. This is even beyond that, isn't it? This is Cardiac's level heavy metal, isn't it? This is an incredible album, but that's still metal, isn't it? Let's go even further out now. One of the greatest metal bands of all time, if you could call them metal, Fishbone, Give a Monkey a Brain. Of course, my favourite album by Fishbone is The Reality of My Surroundings, but I think that's so eclectic, it's very difficult to call that a heavy metal album. This is a heavy metal album. Things like Swim and is it Black Flowers, and some of the sort of free jazz freakouts on here. Servitude, Black Flowers, Swim, Properties of Propaganda, that's funk. The Warmth of Your Breath, avant-garde metal. Le Meringue is funk. They Have Abandoned Their Hopes, metal. End of the Rain, metal. So this is the closest Fishbone got, I think, to a full-on metal album. And Swim and Servitude, that's metal. I love this album, you know, and I think the production's better on this than Reality of My Surroundings. And then the last one I've got, this is Scraping the Barrel, is that John Zorn, Naked City. This is dark, gothic, avant-garde jazz. And it's so avant-garde, it sounds like metal. And on here, it opens up with, it's got like, they do a Debussy track. That's not metal. Then they follow that up by a Scriabin prelude. That's not metal. And then we get an Orlando de Lassus track, and then we get a Charles Ives track, and then we get a Messiaen track. And before that, we have a almost half-hour dark gothic epic called Grand Guignol, which I don't think is metal, but metalers would love it because it's dark. But then we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I think we get around 40 very short, very intense, early Napalm Death style, you know, scream-corey death metal. This is the heaviest album that I have shown you. This is without doubt metal, but it's not. And that cover, I hope I don't get banned, that's real. That's a real photograph. And then on the back you have that. It's all pretty dark. They are, if you understand the nature of this video, they are my 10 essential metal albums, because they're the only ones left in my collection. All the rest has gone, so they weren't essential. I've held on to those, and I think I've held on to every one of those because there's another aspect on there that interests me. So the second half of this is, what is my relationship to heavy metal? Do I really like it? You know, or is it just nostalgia? When I watched the Sabbath gig, Anthrax that came out, I've seen Anthrax live, had all their albums, and I enjoyed seeing them. I enjoyed Joey Belladonna coming out and looking like exactly like he did, a petrified version of him 40 years ago. It was incredible. As though they, you know, encased him in carbonite for the last 40 years and just brought him out to do that gig. They did it in Indians. I love it. But how much am I loving it? How much is it just nostalgia? You know, because what I noticed was when Slayer came out, and I was never much of a Slayer fan, but I liked them. But when Slayer came out, it meant nothing to me. Metallica meant something to me. Seeing the guys like Steven Tyler meant something. And I love Extreme, known in Betancourt. I love all these I do love them. But I see heavy metal as being the gateway for musicians. That's what's remarkable about. I'm not a metaler. You know, I'm not sat in here with a great big beard and my head shaved bald and, you know, with Celtic tattoos all down my arms, you know, and wearing a Slayer t-shirt, you know, and all that bit. I'm not that. I stopped being that in about 1983. And then I was into other things. But metal, when I heard it, there was an aspect of heavy metal. What it is, I've always been interested in the esoteric. I've always been interested in finding out, like, the secret. And when I discovered these metal bands, I was like going, why aren't these on the TV? Why aren't they played on the radio? Well, I've never heard of all this. And now suddenly I'm discovering all these bands. Why is it I put Radio 1 on, they're playing all this stuff, you know, even things like The Cure and The Smiths, but they're not playing heavy metal. What is it about heavy metal? What is it? And I felt that there was something real. There was something real, and because it was real, it was dangerous. And the powers that be didn't like it because they thought it was dumb. It wasn't sophisticated enough for them. And I felt that they'd made the same decision about progressive rock, and they'd made the same decision about jazz rock fusion. And the only music that I was listening to that the critics would actually grudgingly say is brilliant was the jazz, Coltrane and things like that. But when I read their critiques of that, I thought they don't actually get this. And so from a very young age, I had a massive distrust of the music press. I had tons of music encyclopedias, which I devoured, but I was sort of seeing through a film of their sort of elitist, middle-class, literate, I went to Cambridge and studied literature, view of the world. And that sort of seeped through. And they couldn't accept these metal bands because they saw them as being cheap and bad taste. Now, that sort of intellectual elite have now got round to the fact that you can walk around with a Slayer t-shirt on, and it's a sort of postmodern irony that they embrace deeply, means that they can sort of make a nod towards those bands. And a lot of the metal bands that have come in since 1995 is basically pop music, pop production aesthetic linked with a way of creating music which keeps those critics happy. The critics can champion a modern metal band because there's no dirt there. There's no bad taste songs about women and groupies or getting drunk. There's none of that. There's no bad taste songs about bloody Tolkien characters marching through the landscape or, you know, satanic rituals. There's none of that. And when bands do that now, the elites can sort of nod along in a sort of postmodernist knowing way. Go, oh, I love Cannibal Corpse. Of course you love Cannibal Corpse. Of course you do. Right? The question is, do you love bloody UFO? Do you love Judas Priest? Now, Judas Priest managed to do it. They've been around long enough, and now the critics are turning around and going, oh, well, they were great, weren't they? They were great. And you know that Rob Halford, he's gay, you know, and they really were one of the first. And then all this crap comes out, and I can't stick it. And that is what I like about metal. I like metal when it's the music of just normal people. That those normal people are very accepting. I love the Sabbath gig, and I'm going to say this over and over again, because I knew we were there to pay homage and show our love to Black Sabbath. I didn't care how crap they are, as long as they all stood on stage next to each other. And so everything they did was a positive to me, and I appreciated it. You know, Billboard taking his shirt off and looking like a gargoyle off a sort of medieval church. Ozzy sat on his black throne with such an honest mixture of pain, wanting to do a good job, and gratitude. Geezer Butler's standing in the background playing the bass like a beast, still on full form as Tony Iommi is. On both sides, these two, you know, holding it down, still, you know, at full strength. But Bill Ward and Ozzy, you know, it meant a lot to both of those to do that gig. It meant a lot for me for them to all be on stage. And all I heard Ozzy say was, "We love you. We love you." A big smile. "We love you." And as he said it, people in the audience went, "We love you." And this goes back to me being a teenager, no longer into metal, but my friends are into metal, going out on a night out, going around the nightclubs, everyone's dancing to the bloody indie music or whatever the handbag music is at that time, and it's all very trendy, everyone's got their trendy haircuts, there's all that sort of yuppie wine bar thing. And then one of your metal, you know, mates goes, "Oh, shall we go over to Edwards, you know, up in Birmingham?" So you go over to there. Once you walk through that door, you were safe, because everybody in there wasn't judging anybody, right? They just weren't. There was a venue called the Highwayman, was it, up near Crewe, and used to go up there. It was all the way up there just to sit in there and feel like you were surrounded by nice, normal people that weren't going to judge you. And it's all that aspect of metal. Now, I have to be honest. By the time I was 15 years old, I'd forgotten metal. I'd just moved on. I got into progressive rock, then I got into jazz rock fusion, then I got into jazz, and I got into free jazz, avant-garde music. I was listening to the minimalist composers. I was right artsy-fartsy type. I was only buying albums that were like on ECM records. But I'd also tried to keep the fusion thing going. And so I was listening to all that GRP stuff, John Patitucci, Chick Corea's Electric Band. Now I look back on that, and that was a bad decision. That stuff was middle of the road shite. Some great playing there. And I can remember I went into Wolverhampton and I was upstairs going through the import jazz fusion albums. And I'm thumbing some album by, I don't know, Frank Gambale or something. And it's like really expensive because it's on an import. And I look over to my right and there was a Red Hot Chili Peppers album. And I thought, should I buy that? Just, you know, do something different, Andy. You know, live a little. Buy that Red Hot Chili. And I took it home and I enjoyed it. And so the Red Hot Chili Peppers actually drew me back in. And also, around that time, I'd been a Zappa fan. I'd followed Steve Vai's trajectory, and I'd bought the Disturbing the Peace album, Alcatraz, which I no longer have. I don't know whether they call that a proper heavy metal album. Then Eat 'em and Smile. I'd bought that, and I loved that. Went to see that tour. Massive Vai fan. And so that kept me going. So I suddenly have Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I've got David Lee Roth, and then Anthrax, Metallica. Who else at that time would I have been listening to? Bands like Halloween and stuff like that. 88, I went to the Monsters of Rock Festival. That was great. And then you start to get the whiff of these sort of rap metal bands coming in. Fishbones, 24/7 Spies, Suicidal Tendencies, Firehose, a whole bunch of rap metal bands, Urban Dance Squad. There was a whole bunch of this, and this I loved. And then I dropped the jazz. And before I knew it, I'm then listening to drum and bass and jungle. I'm listening to trip-hop, ambient music, electronica, square pusher. Again, the metal came back into my life and exposed me, and I'm back on track. I'm no longer just, you know, becoming one of those sad musos who likes to listen to GRP albums. And so, you know, when you listen to any pop music, oh yeah, I love Simply Red. You know, that's what I realised, you know, when Simply Red Stars came out and all my fusion-y good player mates were listening to it, I was thinking, hang on, I don't want to be in this place. I can't be doing this. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood Sugar Sex Magic came out, absolutely incredible. And then you got Alice in Chains, you got Soundgarden, you got Pearl Jam, who I wasn't a fan of, but they came out. Nirvana, not so much as a fan of them. I liked the last album, the In Utero album. Best, I liked that when it came out, but love Soundgarden. What else was I listening to? Primus, Fishbone, Living Colour, Pantera, Rage Against the Machine, Korn. We had a band, some of the British bands. What did we have? Therapy, as I said. Not that much, really. There was a sort of rap metal band called Censor. They were huge in the early 90s. If you went to it, and you had these festivals, and so you had the whole rave thing, and then you start to get a lot of normal festivals out in a field. Censor would always be on. They sort of grabbed that you know, they come out of bands like Pop Will Eat Itself, EMF to a certain extent, Jesus Jones. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. And then I was off. Radiohead, Massive Attack, Square Pusher, or Tekra, Aphex Twin. Or the 90s was an incredible time for music. You had Rage Against the Machine, Pantera, well then what, you have Korn, and then you started to get that new metal thing come in. Now, I have to be honest, there is one other metal album that I still got, because I do like it, and because I didn't want to come across as not very cool, I didn't put it in, but now I'm here, I feel like I can almost like, because I've still got it, and the reason is because I still listen to this album, I think it's a good album, I do think it's a good album. I'll go and get it, and we'll throw that into the mix as well. So by the end of the 90s, we'd got Linkin Park, which I didn't like. I don't like moody bands. I don't like teenage angst. You know, I was a grown-up by that point. Limp Bizkit, I felt, could write a riff. They could write a riff, and they were pretty cool. And they had a little bit in the DNA, a little bit of Primus. You know, remember that guitarist, the silver bloke? He was quite strange. So that new metal thing I actually quite liked. And the album that just blew me away, it was this one. And I didn't have the guts to put it on. But I'm going to offer that one up as well, because that's still in my collection, because I like this. The production's incredible. The riffage on this. So if you want to know what this is Methods of Mayhem, which was Tommy Lee's band. Tommy Lee got tired of being in the saddest band, because Motley Crue was sad when they were big. Once the grunge thing came along, they were completely wiped out of that. And until they realised that they could sell their decadence to make money, they were in no man's land. And Tommy Lee didn't want to be there. So we went off and did this band Methods of Mayhem, and it featured a whole bunch of guests on here. We've got, who's on here? Let's have a look. I can't read this anymore. Am I ever going to be able to read that? And he's got certain words upside down, you see. This is what happens when you get old. But I know there's some rappers on here. There's a lot of the new metalers on here. This is a really good album. I'm gonna put it out there. I'm sure I'm gonna get shot down. They go, well, God, Andy, he's talking about Coltrane or Thelonious Monk or bloody incredible stuff. And here he is, proffering a Methods of Mayhem album. And then by this time I'm teaching. I'm in colleges and I'm doing stuff. Been doing that for a while. And the kids come in, and then suddenly it's Blink 182 and Green Day and Offspring and all that. I hated all that. And by that point, metal had become pop music, and that was it. And with that came pop music production, so no one's playing on these albums anymore. And I really grew to hate metal. And the cliche of some modern metal band, which has like some screamy verse, and then a nice pretty bridge, and then a chorus that would go down well on Eurovision Song Contest. No cool riffage whatsoever, no blues, no soul, and the drums is being programmed in a studio, and the guitars are being dialed in. It's not a real amp, and they've played it a million times and cut it up and quantized it. And what metal had for me, which was soul and dirt, is gone. And so I think I've spent the last 20 years despising metal, absolutely despising it, and missing out on certain bands that were doing really great stuff because I despised it. Because a lot of these players that were cheating in the studio, they could still play. What it was is that the kids wanted that aesthetic. They wanted that aesthetic, and so the producers were able to provide that aesthetic. And so now I've talked it through to you like this. I've talked it through in the way I have. I have spent a great part of my life loving metal, and twice in my life, metal has got me back on track. It got me into music in the first place, and then at the end of the 80s, it got me back on track, and I was no longer a sad jazz fusion musician that had got no taste, which is what I'd become. And I thank metal for that as well. But also, I've spent 20 years despising it. And it's become something I don't understand. On Saturday, with that Sabbath gig, we saw the final chapter of metal. I now think we could consign metal to like a dead form of music. It will carry on. The kids will still like it, but the period of creativity and the ability for you to buy a metal album and then find your way back to the blues, or find your way back to avant-garde jazz, or find your way back to progressive rock, that's over. It's no longer going to fulfill the job that it did, which is to open up the world to musicians. You know, it's like you find a jazz musician playing at the moment, you know, now, of my age or younger, and chat to them and find out what got them into jazz. They started off liking metal or rock or the blues rock or something like that, and it takes you there. So I've realised I've spent as much time as despising this music form, and I think that despising was too much. I think I should wind that in. But within that time, albums like Metallica, Soundgarden, Anthrax, all these albums that I've lost, I didn't care that I'd lost them because I wasn't really interested in that anymore. I'd moved on. And as much as I can go back to a band like Rush or AC/DC and remember being 12 years old, and that has a really powerful thing, a lot of these metal bands where I was older, they don't quite hold that position in my life. And I might love some of the music, and I think I've stated where I stand with metal. But they are my, because if you notice the titles of all these videos, so I'm not saying the essential albums, and I think I've done that. These are my essential albums. These are the ones I've kept hold of those albums. You want to see them again? We'll go through them again so you can see them, and you can then proffer your opinion on them. Faith No More, The Real Thing. Methods of Mayhem, Tommy Lee. The Greatest Hits of Alice in Chains. Iron Maiden, Run to the Hills. Naked City, avant-garde jazz death metal at its finest. You can give a monkey a brain, but and they'll swear they're the centre of the universe, by Fishbone. Mr. Bungle's debut album, which is called Mr. Bungle. Time's Up by Living Colour, Monster. Rage Against the Machine's debut album. Pantera, Vulgar Display of Power. And finally, Psalm 69 by Ministry. They are actually my essential albums. When you stare at these records behind you and you think, I wonder what actual metal albums Andy's got, you will see not that many. Not that many. The next job to do is probably pull out my 10 essential funk albums. Now, there will be a lot to choose from then, and that says a lot, doesn't it? Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, stick a like on it. If you want to see some more, press subscribe. If you want to support me, you can become a Patreon free member or paid up member. You can become a member of this channel. I'm now starting to film exclusive content, which will never be shown in public. There's going to be a couple of videos going up. So, you know, check out that if you want to become a member. That's it, really. We're done. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one.